Welcome, everybody, to the show. This is the Sustainiacs. I'm Mike Vincent. I'm always the Sustainiac. Bonnie Monteleone on my screen's left. I don't know what side she's on right now, but she is also a Sustainiac. She's been on, let's look, your fourth time, Bonnie? Is that right?
All right.
That's something like that. A regular. And Nina, who I've been trying to get on forever. Nina, is it Bellucci Butler or Butler Bellucci?
Bellucci Butler.
Bellucci Butler, right? So awesome. Thanks for coming on the show, guys. This is the end of the year one, right? This is and looking forward to next year. So we'll talk about all kinds of fun things. Bonnie Pop Plastic Ocean Project, right? What is it? What are you doing there? Give the people that haven't seen you four times on the show a little taste of what you're doing there.
Sure. So I run a nonprofit, and the nonprofit has three pillars: education through research. We have a full on research lab. We get people of all ages studying plastics, the chemistry of plastics, solutions to plastics. And then our second pillar is outreach through art. So we believe that the arts are equally as important as the science, because oftentimes the science stays in the science community. It's the storytellers, it's the videographers, the painters, the photographers that are the ones that are telling the story about the plastic problem, bringing awareness to the general public, and then solutions through collaboration. And that's why Nina Butler is here today. She's one of my favorites in leaning into how do we get ourselves out of this mess. And it is truly such a gyre of plastic problems that we need to sort out, and I think today is a great day for us to talk about where we've been and where we're going. We've got a pretty steep climb, but we got to start somewhere. So thanks for
Yeah.
having me today.
Thanks for coming on. And you two, both of you guys together is amazing. Nina, tell people about Stina, the company, what you guys are doing there. And I love what you're doing there. And I echo, we need that information. We need that transparency. And that's kind of what you provide and is what the effects are, what the impacts are, what we're up against and that type of stuff. Sometimes, as Bonnie said, it looks really daunting. I was reading something today on a post on LinkedIn and I almost replied, I'm not confident. And then many times I want to go, oh gosh, we can't even get over the fact that just bombing each other is the stupidest thing on the planet, and we're going to fix these problems. But anyways, Nina, tell us what you guys are doing there to help this problem, because you guys are doing great stuff.
That's exactly the article I was working on actually last night. The fact that we have multiple wars going on is just further making my hope dwindle in terms of how we address climate change and the plastic waste crisis. And they are all tangled up together. They are all political. So Stina Inc. is a research and technology company. We are a mission-based company, so we function like a nonprofit often. But basically, what we do, we have also three pillars. We do research, and the main one that's easy to kind of wrap your head around is we've been tracking how much plastic gets collected for recycling year over year for over 15 years. So it's pretty depressing data to be reporting, but it's really important to measure what we want to manage. Then we also do facilitation and collaboration, as Bonnie mentioned. And then we don't have the artists exactly, but we have really good data visualization and graphic designers and a design build team. So what we work to do is bring data forward so that we help people make better decisions through online tools and data visualization. So we love to really spotlight and amplify the work of other people. So we're helping make these connections so that we can move faster, better together.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nina. And you know what? One of the things that really surprised me going on your site is how much information I could glean from it before going through a paywall, which I thought was amazing.
Yes.
It was really good. One of the things that you said, Bonnie, was, you have the art part of it, right? And that storyteller. And to both of you, and I'll start with you, Nina, is the question on that is this. When in my former job, I was one of the founding members of FreightWaves, right? And it is logistics, specifically supply chain data, gathering it from all these different proliferations of different IoT devices, et cetera, cell phones that have come over the last 20 years, right? There's all this exhaust data that you can get that nobody knew what to do with. And I could dump it in the hands, and we did, of a whole bunch of people with PhD at the end of their name and stuff like that, data scientists and people who paid attention in trigonometry and all that kind of thing. But unless they have that human sentiment, that sensitivity to interpret it almost through the art type of world. It's really hard to understand what you're up against and how to change that. Is that a similar thing you think in what we're all three of us trying to get done, is changing that data to something where someone go, well, heck, I could just do this and that will help a little bit. And if all of us did that, that moves the needle 5%, which is a heck of a lot better than going backwards like 1.3% or whatever it was we did in emissions last year.
Yeah, I'm going to steal Bonnie's phrase that she feels like Forrest Gump sometimes. Like I don't have a PhD, and I would definitely not consider myself one of the smartest people on the planet, but my skill set is making big picture connections and connecting people. So about a year and a half ago, I was over in Monaco, of all places, for the World Plastic Summit, surrounded by scientists from around the world. They brought together the brightest scientists to work on the plastic ocean crisis. And, hearing all of this amazing research and the potential, I was like, but if we don't get to the basic foundational problems in economics, we will never solve this problem. Because, as I said, on the world stage at the World Petrochem Conference in front of about 2,000 oil executives, I said, we have a trickle of recycling compared to a tsunami of virgin resin production. And that trend is only growing. The delta is getting bigger. And it really is just basic economics. And our mutual friend, Ralph Shammy, as an economist for more than a couple decades at the IMF, says if you have an economic objective, you have to have the instruments to achieve that objective. And if we're not moving the needle in recycling, it means we fundamentally lack those instruments. It's really basic. And where we get stuck often as a company is in this no man's land between, yes, we're environmentalists, and yes, we're trying to unlock the innovation to solve the problem. So it's easy to demonize plastics, and we all live with them. I don't know anyone yet, even though I know people that live off the grid, no one lives without plastic in this world, because they are a symptom of our society that's living highly disconnected from nature. But I think, and Bonnie does a good job of flipping the script a little bit, that what if we viewed it more as like they're the opposite of like our kryptonite, right? Like, imagine surviving a Michigan winter without fossil fuels or without plastics, but instead of like really coveting them, we're just squandering them. And so I think it's more about how we put value on the things that sustain life that will really unlock the innovation for conscious consumption and recovery of material.
Yeah. I mean, we're taught that though, right? I mean, you can look back to I think it's Life magazine, some mid to late 50s, that the covers just show the throwaway culture. And it shows a couple using like Tupperware and stuff and just throwing it in the garbage. Hey, use it, throw it away. Don't even wash the Tupperware. You just use it, throw it in the garbage, was what was pounded in our heads, right? Mm-hmm. For a long, long time.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback off of that. So there's two things. And one is, a lot of these plastics were designed to protect nature. So the very first plastic that was produced was synthetic billiard balls, because we were using ivory. And the owner of the company recognized that, we are going to annihilate the elephants if we don't come up with another material. And so that was really kind of the dawn of plastic solving an environmental problem. And we can say the same thing about plastic bags. Unfortunately, because nature did not design these products, nature does not know what to do with them. And so they persist in the environment indefinitely. And so we really have what Nina calls the plastic paradox. The plastics allow us to live beyond our abilities. So we're able to breathe underwater because of plastic. We can breathe in space because of plastic, right? Think of all the superhuman things we can do because of plastic. But that superhumanness comes at a horrible price. And one of the things that we look at are the chemicals that go into plastics and how they have a direct impact, not just on nature, but the human body. So they're endocrine disruptors that, affect every cell in the human body. Your endocrine system does manage every cell. And so if that's being affected, now we're seeing more signs of obesity, diabetes, and all other kinds of health problems that have been associated with the chemicals from plastic.
So we're not talking about just, plastic particles. Like you read that I mean, like if it stretches, it's polyester, right? So there's plastic, and I've got this brand new shirt from Christmas, and I'm breathing in basically particles of plastic just wearing my shirt, right? And so you ingest somewhere of a credit card size, but it's not just that. You're talking about forever chemicals, right? That come from many different sources, right? Not just plastics. I mean, just to be clear on what you're talking about with your endocrine receptors, et cetera, right?
That is true. It's used in a lot of different things, and that's kind of gives the plastics a free pass, right? Like, well, these chemicals are in everything, so how can you blame us or blame the chemistry from plastics?
Yeah.
But a lot of the research we're learning is that we can point to plastic as being part of the problem,
Oh,
but
sure.
also that chemistry is part of the solution, right? So if we can figure out a way to tailor down the different types of chemicals, we can make plastics more recyclable. And I think, we can't recycle ourselves out of this problem, but we can't ignore the importance of recycling either.
Well, we have more
Right.
human-made material on the planet than all living biomass, so we can't not recycle it at this point.
Yeah, it's not an option to just stop, right? I mean, even if we just stop making it right now, we've still got so much that is just laying around. We have to do something about that, which is we'd already done what Deborah Dahl would call extracted. If we've detached it from the earth, we need to do something about it, right? Is kind of how she breaks it down in that simplest form, like you were talking about, Nina. It becomes, and I agree with you. It's in my mind, it becomes more of, and we use the term in logistics a lot because if you're a trucker, you got a hammer and a chisel, and you just knocked off one of the last corners of a square to make a wheel. Compared to other industries, right? That was the joke like 10 years ago. Now it's through COVID, it just exploded with technologies. But sometimes don't we need to go back there? I mean, don't we have to look at the bottom of the pyramid to find out why the top's not level at some point? I mean, I used to build houses with a friend of mine, and man, when you get up and you'd level that roof line, you'd like, yeah. And if it wasn't because of the roof line. It was because you did something in the foundation that was wrong, right? And doesn't that make it kind of
Are
difficult
we
because we
jumping
got to
right
kind of
into the
unravel?
ethics of the problem?
Yeah, we've got to
It is.
unravel
I
down
mean,
to
it's
the bottom, right?
inequality. At the end of the day, we have created an economic structure that's pretty stacked. Like the system is rigged, and so the concentration of wealth is really what's driving this linear economy. And so until we get to these root origins of how we live more in harmony with each other and within our natural ecosystems, we're going to continue to be in this race over the cliff. I kind of think about it as like the four horsemen of the apocalypse that take your biggest corporations. They're by design. If you're not basically wasting a lot and not recovering, you're fiduciarily doing the right thing. So I don't know that we're going to get the CEOs of these major corporations to change, but maybe we can develop the economic instruments to get the horses to change direction. And that's where people like Ralph Shammy or Delton Chen, who was the inspiration for Kim Stanley Robertson's book, Ministry for the Future, is have we really overlooked the most fundamental structure that we've created in economics that's based on the fiat system and not based on stock of nature?
Mm, hmm hmm Yeah, that's a solid point because if you looked at most of our things, you can really. I always say just follow the money. People, if there's a problem, just follow the money. Somewhere there's money involved. It just is. I had this argument with my philosophy teacher back in college. And it took several days to convince her of what I was talking about. I said that man is not capable of not being selfish. And that's not a bad thing because what you two are doing is because that's what you believe you should be doing. You feel better about yourselves because you're doing it and it's grounded in the right thing. And so am I. So we do these things, right? It isn't necessarily that nature that is bad. It is what is underneath and what we've been taught to use it for that is bad. And if you follow the dollar, it's always the dollar. It's always the money. It's always the yen. It's always the euro. It is a financial system that wants you to build an engine that'll go from 0 to 1,000 in 100 yards and explode at the end. That's the problem, right? And until we can change that so Cummins Engines just got sued $1.675 billion, not for greenwashing. They didn't lose the fine for greenwashing. They didn't lose it for overstating their sustainability goals. They lost it because for the last 10 years, they've been putting purposely defeat devices into their engines to go around the emissions controls. Okay, that's not misunderstanding or accidentally, putting green on your Coke bottle and then getting sued by somebody who goes, well, I thought it was green, so I'm going to sue you for money. No, that's the dollar, right? It's money.
Intentional deception. Yeah.
Yeah. It's awful. And on the other hand, they're also doing great things with natural gas engines, as you probably know, Bonnie. I know you get into the plastics to fuels and stuff like that. They're doing great things with natural gas engines and moving forward and stuff like that. And on the other hand, you're doing these defeat devices. I don't know how we do things, but
I think
go ahead,
yeah.
Please.
Well, Bonnie mentioned the plastic paradox. There's a way of looking at it in terms of plastic as giving us superhuman capabilities, but I think we're touching on to something else, which is the plastic paradox that I was recognizing back in 2018, right after I had purchased the assets of the company I worked for 17 years. I decided to invest in going to the World Petrochemical Conference so I could really understand more upstream production. And this was the real emergence of the shale gas revolution, like really seeing the impact of it. So to be amongst people that are in the business of producing oil, the concern at the time was not about the plastic waste crisis or the recycling problem. It was really about the fact that as we're using more plastic, we're creating a drawdown in demand for fuel. We're lightweighting things, so therefore we're making less demand. So therefore we have to expand production of base chemicals where it was only about 10%. The goal is to grow new markets for base chemicals, which is plastics are a part of that. That's the piece that's really, so as we lightweight vehicles, as we move to electric vehicles, as we're more efficient with natural gas, compressed natural gas, there's actually less demand for the main product that oil and gas companies are selling. That's the real crux of the plastic paradox. And so whether we're looking at a lot of environmentalists saying, let's just get out of plastic, and the result would be going to more paper bags, going to glass, going to metal. That's the best thing in the world for the oil industry because it creates so much more demand because it's heavier than plastic.
Yeah. Well, and it really hurts emissions. I mean, you're going to spend so much more energy moving and making aluminum cans, et cetera. I mean, there's different studies that you can look at that says like a reusable bottle is only good after its 100th use or something like that. I mean, you can change data to look at things a million different ways.
And I don't want to in any way encourage that, but I think the point is we need to move towards more complex decision analysis and transparency of what trade-offs we're making. So we are hyper focused on the theoretical, is it recyclable? But we're not looking at, is it actually being recovered and what's the upstream impact? What's the full life cycle impact? What's the toxicity impact? And I was driving up with my husband's also in logistics, supply chain logistics. And so I was stuck in the car driving him up through the clear-cut forest in Virginia. We're going to do a weekend getaway up in Hampton, Virginia. And so I was stuck listening to him talk about how they're just building this efficiency so they can move more product right before the holidays. And all I could think of was, and more boxes and more trees. And then as we move to be smarter and not use plastic when we shouldn't, but then we think that it's just fine to use even more paper products. So that I think that's the piece that I hope as we move into 2024 is to move away from this binary argument of good versus bad, but really the complexity of moving towards circularity.
Yeah.
How are we really measuring reuse? How are we measuring just reduction of the things that cause harm?
I agree 100%. And one of the things I look at is, like you were saying, with the oil and gas and the production of oil and gas, and people don't understand how that dynamics. It's not necessarily use less fuel, therefore there's less oil being refined, et cetera. It's not directly linear. There's changes, and there's impacts to the slippery slopes we walk, right? Like Bonnie pointed out with the billiard balls, right? Great idea, slippery slope. We accidentally fell down real quick, right? So, and even EVs are in that type of situation. How do we get those companies to realize that there's this huge, enormous, growing pile of raw materials in our land and in our oceans, et cetera, that they can mine, that they could be actually using if we went back to some of I argued to some of the basics. I'm all into looking into pyrolysis and changing things into fuel and figure out how we can break down those polymers back to monomers and do all that kind of stuff. But they all still rely on, you know, my guitar pick making it back to somebody who can recycle it when I break it. Right? If that doesn't
So how do
connect,
we do that?
nothing happens.
Well, I work with young people, and I like to tell them the story about the graduate, right? So, plastic, it's the future was the main line in that movie. And
Yeah.
so I tell them, for them, waste is their future. That if you can figure out how to repurpose items, you can create a market for yourself and you can actually make a living and make a difference. I really truly believe that the next market has to be waste. And it doesn't just have to be plastic. I mean, we throw away so much wood and paper and all the other things like glass. We've demonized glass to the point where now it's less recycled, but it's actually can be recycled 1,000 times over, as opposed to plastic that is typically downcycled. So I think that these markets may have to be in communities. So not shipping it, hundreds of miles away in order to be produced into something. Um, and I think that that's where we can help get ourselves out of this problem. I was just watching a video that Nina sent me, and it was with murmuration, right? So these birds, right? One little bird flying around, who can see that? But when they get together in the thousands, they actually cause people to stop, pause, look in the air and see the wonder and the awe. And that's what we try to do, is get people to start making better choices that's not only good for the environment but good for themselves. And the way we do that is reducing our consumption of plastic. That has to be the number one thing, just like reduce, reuse, recycle has to be what we focus on. And maybe it's not just to protect whales in the ocean. Maybe we start connecting the dots that all this cancer and all these health problems that we're having could actually have a direct effect from the plastics we're consuming. I talk about, peanut butter. If there's a bad batch of peanut butter and 7 people get sick, somehow, some magical way, they can figure out what batch of peanut butter it's coming from. And yet, with all these health problems, how many of us now have family and friends that have cancer, that we're not taking a look at what we're eating and drinking out of as suspect? Err on the side of caution, reduce your consumption of plastic to help yourselves and your family.
That's where I feel like I've gone. I'm trying to not just throw my whole 20 something year career down the tubes, but I knew when I got out of undergrad, and I had I had a bunch of professors when I was at the Evergreen State College, this kind of hippie school in Olympia, Washington. But I had the same advisor as Pete Myers, who wrote Our Soul and Future, and then another professor in biochem who was just beginning to introduce me at the time to, we don't yet know what these molecules are going to do to our endocrine system. And we had a visiting professor that was doing research on a pond in Florida where they had recognized that there was a shrinkage in reproduction organ size within alligators after exposure to these particular pesticides. So we've known this for a really long time, but we haven't been measuring, monitoring, and keeping an eye on things. And when I finished undergrad, I was pre-med at the time and looking at, do I get into research? How do I explore the world of plastic? Because I knew in all of my being that we had a big plague coming our way with plastics. And when I met my old boss, my work mentor back in 2000, I said, I don't want to put out all these small flames only to ignite the inferno. And I kept asking back in the early 2000s, why do we have this many different plastics for this same application? When if we just separated between the float and sink, it wouldn't be that hard to actually recover the material. But as you mix PVC with PET, then you've got two that sink, and then you have the others that are floating. We really could simplify it, but it came down to economics. Some are cheaper than others, and therefore you want them. We did end up eliminating some through eco-modulation. We pay more in California for something that's not as recyclable or easy to recover, but we haven't had that widespread. And so again, going back to our capitalistic system, if we don't penalize or have accountability to things that are problematic, of course you're going to continue to use them. That is inherently the problem. And I think it was pretty masterful. The American Chemistry Council was separate from the American Plastics Council, and then they merged into one. They used to keep them separate because they're like, well, plastics are plastics and chemicals are different, and we don't want to scare people about plastics. And they're like, it doesn't matter anymore. And they just became one organization.
Do you see that as a good thing, or as a people becoming desensitized to these issues?
Desensitized, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's interesting that you talk about the two different, you've got the float and you've got the sink, and people think there's 7 types of plastics. There's millions of different types of plastics. It's incredibly complicated how many there are. There's 6 that are identifiable, and then 7's like everything else you can't figure out. But even in PET, bottles, there's PET, there's PETG, there's PET for shrink wrap, there's PET. It's unbelievable what is there. And to undo that stuff, basic laws of thermodynamics make it incredibly difficult to undo that stuff or recycle it chemically, et cetera. Bonnie knows that all too well, I'm sure, with a lot of those struggles that are there. So how do we educate people on that, and how do we impact that? Let me tell you this. I was at a trade show, a plastics show, an AMI show, and a gentleman said, there's a major CPG company. They're talking about the foil plastic bags. And someone said, and he was on a panel, and someone said, well, if just all the bags were the same, then we could use them, and we could recycle them. And he said, that's our advertising. Those are our billboards. We're never going to stop printing our product on the side of those bags. And he was on the recycling stage talking about how we improve recycling. Arguably, a major, huge impact on recycling if this company were to say, you know what, you're right, and we're going to do that. And I would argue that through a marketing campaign, it would be a massive success, market share-wise. But not going to happen, man. He's publicly stated that.
I've been trying to get this to happen for, 10 years at least, because I've worked in the plastic film problem since 2002, basically. But I was trying to get all of the companies that make the garment wrap, every package is, and then if it became more cachet to see that it has some recycled content and they all went to the same exact one, then there would be an absolute, this is before the shale gas revolution. So the scrap price was much higher. And at this time we had pilots running where we had malls recovering, because everything comes wrapped in a poly bag, right? And then we had distributors that after they would drop off product, they would backhaul the film and bail it at their distribution center. We had paper packers, companies that handle cardboard, also handling film. There was just a lot more engagement across the value chain in recovering the material because there was more value in it, because virgin prices were higher. When the perfect storm of both National Sword and then also with the shale gas revolution, all those third-party handlers kind of fell out from the market, and the major reclaimers that are vertically integrated like Trex remained. But for the most part, the economics of recovery have become just an upside-down business model. And yet we still have these recyclers that are truly the innovators right now. And I think Bonnie's right. Getting into waste is the future. And being able to give talks in Europe and other parts of the world is such the refreshing experience, because there's a focus on how do we actually urban mine. They don't have the space that we have. And so my fantasy is that one day an ExxonMobil partners with a WM, because there's more economic benefit in regenerating the land that's been destroyed or preventing it. We're going to have breach of landfills along low coastal areas and flooding. Those who can regenerate that land before that happens should be economically rewarded, but we're
Yeah.
not right now. And so I think the future, in order to get the horsemen to change directions, we have to focus on rewarding the companies economically that actually show regeneration of ecosystems. That's what's fundamentally missing right now from our economic system.
I mean, it's unbelievable. Bonnie, how do you see this playing out? I mean, from your end, see now, explain this. When I look at the two of you, I see I see similar paths. Obviously, where all three of us are trying. We got the same goal in our companies and what we're trying to do, trying to impact it in different ways, right? Nina, I see you using these statistics and really helping companies see where their impacts are, and hopefully they're starting to use this data to really understand if we do this, it impacts that, right? I mean, that's a lot of it, right? Trying to have that predictive nature of what they're doing and what their impacts are going to have through the data you're collecting. I would imagine that's how I see how I would use it if I were in manufacturing, et cetera, would be, okay, we need to do the right thing. We also need to uphold our value to our shareholders and stakeholders as well, because we do live in a financial world. So how does, I take your data and do that? Bonnie, I see you educating people and try and get the not necessarily grassroots, but more that education of people in it that are going to come out and be those chief sustainability officers or be those chemists that are actually working in natural type of fibers and doing those right things and kind of unraveling this type of stuff. Do you think, Bonnie, that those two things together can make this happen, or do we need to drive towards more and more mandates and regulations, or does that defeat it as well? Can we do this without government coming down and saying, Bonnie, no more plastics in your house, and really screwing things up?
Right. Well, I think it's all the above. I think we do need to legislate the chemicals that go into plastic so that we can create that circularity. My mention of the murmuration is corporations only have to have about 4% of their bottom line affected to get their attention. So my goal is to educate as many people as possible. So what we create that shift so that we can create the loss of that 4% on those companies that aren't getting it. So those horsemen we get their attention. And the way we do that is with their bridle, right? And that's the bottom line. It all comes down to the bottom line. If we can empower enough people to make better choices, we can help people steer that direction. Just like the birds, when they fly together, they can create a huge impact.
I love it. I love what you're saying there. So let me ask you. Let me ask you this. You see studies, and I could go back and look and see who they were from. But one of them was from MIT. I saw one in Forbes that I think was Harvard Business Review. There's a bunch. I'm sure, Nina, you're familiar with the ones that say, you know, I think it's like 73% of the people will actually pay more to have a home delivery 3 days later instead of the same day if it shows a positive environmental impact, right? Or 75 or 80%, whatever it is, it's a huge number of millennials will pay more for a good that's in sustainable packaging, and it's even growing in baby boomers and stuff like that, where I grew up, it was plastics. Yeah, hell yeah, let's have plastics and do whatever the throwaway type of culture is what I grew up in. And but then when it comes down to it, they don't. When they're given that choice in the grocery store, they don't. They don't do it. It's only like 40% or something actually follow through when they do that.
We have some direct
how do we
insight.
impact that?
Yeah, we had some because we managed a directory for many years where people could go and search to find out where to recycle specific materials.
Yeah.
We had a direct line of communication with the public, and over the last 5 years, we had more than 10 million visitors. There was a search on average every 55 seconds. So it's not enough. And we have, over 300 million people in the country. So it's still not hitting the masses, but you could
Yeah.
see trends over time, and that people were willing to do some pretty heroic things to try to reduce their waste. And they were
Right.
pissed when we had to take the directory down because we weren't, funded by the industry to maintain it, and because there just wasn't enough commitment across the value chain to make it meaningful. And I don't want to be a part of greenwashing, but it did give my team some hope to see just the sheer volume of people that were really interested, and it was across the country. It wasn't just
What was the directory? It was, you could go there to figure out how to recycle this or how to
like
recycle
your
that.
bathroom tissue, all the plastic
Okay.
polyethylene film.
Oh,
So,
okay. All the films.
mhm.
Okay. Gotcha.
So we maintain the directory by working with the recyclers to say, what do you want in your stream, and to continue to connect the story of, here's the recyclers that can process it, here are the products. We have another directory that shows recyclers that buy material. Then we have another directory that shows products made with recycled content. And then, of course, we have our data dashboard that shows how much actually gets recycled. So it's to show that we have a long way to go, and that even if we're wildly successful to get people to recycle, we don't have the capacity to absorb it. So being in that overview, we decided to pull the directory down because we don't want to give illusions of it. But to say the issue, though, is still people have it in their house and they don't know what to do with it. So I feel that it's unfortunate we had to take it down, but sometimes you have to fail to get to a bigger solution. And hopefully it does call the question that we need real investment in aligning on design, aligning in how we recover material, and investing in an infrastructure. We're just so far from that reality right now. And what I would also, so kind of weaving together where we are in terms of recycling, which is only one element of circularity, and then looking at what are the other pieces that we often overlook. What I tried to convey when I was asked to testify back in 2020 before Congress was, we need North Star policy. Companies are told that they need to align with their ESG goals. They need to hit their specific targets in terms of recycled content. They need to have recyclable material. There's all these different conflicting objectives that they're trying to meet, and then they have what they need to do in Europe, what they need to do in other regions of the world, and what they need to do in the United States. And we don't have something that really drives ultimately towards the North Star. Like, how do they ultimately design for the highest circularity quotient? And that's a complex, maybe abstract terminology. And because it's sometimes abstract or hard to measure in decision analysis, you tend to shy away from the things that are hard. But if we don't really align around driving companies to reducing their overall impact, and then knowing what the delta is of their impact so they can do a proper offset, not just what's been done in carbon offset, but truly a carbon plus offset, we're not going to start the catalyst towards circularity.
I agree. And that's, so how do we, so here's a story for you. And along the lines, it's kind of along the lines of what you said. Sometimes you got to fail to move forward, right? And here's one in the Caribbean. So in the Caribbean and St. Thomas, there's the people. They're the Opia Taino organization. If you look them up, Opia Taino International. I know the chief. She's a great woman, and her husband, her son, all those people. We're actually working with them to bring recycling into the USVI. They're one of our partners. We'll be there in the winter to start setting up infrastructure for recycling of all plastics there. But what they did after the last hurricane was they got grassroots movement together, and they actually sorted through all the recyclables. They PET here, HD here, even by color, wood, glass, all this type of stuff. And I was talking to him like maybe 3 weeks ago. We were talking about this. They were telling me that. And I said, well, what did you do with it? Because there's no recycling in the islands. He said, oh, well, it went to landfill. I said, well, then why did you do it? He said, to prove. It was our protest to prove It can be done. We need the recycling here because we can do this. And he said, it was amazing to see how many people that would be sitting on a sidewalk trying to sell a tourist a bag of weed. They were actually recycling plastics because it was done. And he just used that as a saying, it creates jobs that do all these tremendous things, right? These are the type of things that people need to see, as
Yeah.
well as from the corporate side, right? Bonnie, do you agree with that? I mean, that's
It brings it all the way back to where we started, and that is, doing something at the local level, creating jobs out of repurposing materials at the local level. But they have to have the machinery, the infrastructure in order to do so.
you got to reduce
And
that value chain, right?
yeah,
That value chain's got to be there,
well,
and
once you do that, then you have less demand for buying new, right? So
right.
that's the piece that satisfies that reduction.
Right. So how do we get COP28, right? It was making it always makes headlines, right? And one of the things that I got out of it was driving me absolutely nuts is that they're arguing over a pact. I'm like, what are you spitting in your hand and shaking hands? Is that what you're doing over there? I mean, what is this pact crap? I've had those when I was a kid. Nobody a pact. So I crossing my fingers behind my back, spitting my hand and shaking your hand, going, "Yeah, we're gonna reduce our carbon emissions." Well, so is the USA because we're gonna build everything in India, and theirs are gonna go up, but ours will go down, and well, everything will be great. But one of the things that they were talking about there was because it was held in the UAE, right? Big oil needs to be involved in the changeover to emissions because it's our transition fuel. How do we get them to transition away and the petrochemicals, et cetera, to understand and make it economical to use these vast, like we were talking about, resources of urban mines, of all these landfills are the mines of the future. There's so much valuable raw materials in there to extract and use. How do we get them to be involved? Because that's the only way. They have to show an increase in their bottom line, or at the very least, not a negative, right? At the very least. I mean, just staying steadily profitable isn't good enough
Yeah,
in our society.
I was pretty naive when I ended up giving the talk in 2019 at the World Petrochem Conference because I said, after I said there's a trickle of recycling compared to a tsunami of virgin plastic and we've lost our social license to operate, then I said I leaned into we need to put value on carbon. This industry needs to stop fighting policy on valuing carbon, which sounds completely counterintuitive. But I think where I was naive and short-sighted was that I was too hyper focused on just carbon. And when Bonnie, as I mentioned earlier, Ralph Shammy, a mutual friend of ours, who's been really trying to drive an economic policy that puts value on the services of nature and incorporates nature in every decision that we make so that it becomes this win-win-win model. I talked Bonnie into joining me on an expedition up in Katmai, Alaska, which I didn't want to go because I was like, my carbon footprint of flying all the way from North Carolina to flipping Alaska to go pick up plastic makes no sense, right? And the organizers of the Ocean Plastic Recovery Project, what they're doing is trying to educate young people. So bringing students and pairing with mentors. So again, it's this multi-pronged approach, like Pop and Stina, but they're going out to gather the material before it does break down into further microplastic. They're gathering research, and then they are also educating students. So getting some reverb here, but so as Bonnie and I were out walking along this incredible meadow under Hollow Glacier, so it's just this wildflowers, beautiful meadow, really rich and diverse because the bears poop and they're out there grazing, like the salmon run hadn't come in. So they're pooping and fertilizing and they're grazing, just like mowing down this lawn. And Bonnie and I both looked down and looked at the bear scat and we're like, we need to gather some of this.
Yeah.
Because how much microplastic is in it? Why are they wanting to eat this plastic? Because we already seen so many pieces of plastic up there that had bear teeth marks in it. So that kind of just made this connection in my brain based on listening to Ralph Shammy talk about this, that as right now, there's no economic incentive to go and capture that material. But Captain Andy and Scott Farling, they've invested in doing these expeditions so that they get it. Because in that 1 week, the last time I went up, we got 20,000 pounds of plastic. 1 week.
In a
So
remote area where there's no people.
no people currently live
Yeah.
here. So the point though is that if, as we look at the oil companies, if the economic model were flipped, and this is again based on what Delton Chen, who inspired Kim Stanley Robertson in the Ministry for the Future, if we had, instead of the fiat system, we had a carbon coin where it's bankable because you get the central banks behind it. If you can invest in how you're creating regeneration and reducing carbon emissions, that there's an economic reward that's investable, then you've unlocked the oil majors to become the solution providers. And it would make sense for an ExxonMobil to partner with Waste Management. Waste Management, instead of turning their land assets that they have now to turn into landfills in the future, that they would actually rewild those, and their existing landfills could be urban mined, or instead of pushing the plastic off the surface of the ocean and drilling deep, deep down in the ocean for oil and gas, we could actually be urban mining that. But it only makes sense when you're rewarded for regeneration of the ecosystems that actually sequester carbon, like we saw under Hallow Glacier. From those,
no, that makes sense. So, was were carbon credits, et cetera, the goal to make that happen, and how did they get, in my mind, bastardized into what they are today?
well, yeah, I mean, I think that it is kicking the can down the road, and it's not creating the reduction. But
so how do you change that financial reward model to be effective and not? And maybe I'm wrong. I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I'm very, very passionate, and so I overcome that by speaking loudly, and then people won't argue with me. But so the carbon credits, I don't see those as being anything good. I don't get that you can. It doesn't make any sense to me that you can pollute as long as you pay somebody else not to. That's not the goal here, right?
No.
So how do you change that financial model to what you're talking about? Bonnie, you have something?
You have to have the measurements, right? So a certificate, some kind of institution that actually measures how much carbon sequestration is occurring plus, right? It can't just
Yeah,
be like, oh, I'm gonna give this farmer $1 million to offset my carbon footprint to keep his trees in the ground, right? There has to be an additionality, right? So can he plant more trees? And that's where I measure my carbon sequestration so that you grow the ecosystem services to catch up and hopefully surpass the amount of carbon emissions that we're releasing. Because right now, the Earth cannot, every single year, cannot keep up with the amount of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere. And part of that is because we're cutting down trees, right? Because we're destroying nature so that, this carbon then ends up building in our atmosphere. So,
yeah,
to change this system, we cannot do it. We can't get to Z from A. We've got to literally walk our way out of this mess. And this is just one step in order to rebuild ecosystems that actually can take up that CO2 as we draw down the carbon emissions so that we can not only meet in the middle, but surpass how much we're releasing and putting those carbon sequestration abilities of nature to
right.
take up
it's
that
the
offset.
additionality that's the really important piece. So you've got to actually prove that you're increasing the biodiversity, you're actually rewilding, and that's the other paradox, is that as we, I think we look at what the impact is of our fuel consumption, of our plastic usage, and how we're impacting nature. But what is often, I think, overlooked is just being on this screen right now, the amount of data, or doing a Google search, the impact from a greenhouse gas emissions of kicking on those servers is like reaching the equivalent almost of plastic production. Just the Internet of Things is a whole nother ball of wax that we're not even touching yet.
Oh yeah,
Though,
when you start going down those rabbit holes, you start going, well, heck,
no, but that's the point. Like, we can't. There's not a perfect. Everything we do has an impact, and so it's getting into the accountability piece. is what will actually drive the circularity. We always are taking something and we're either giving something back or we're dumping something back, right? So as we look at really looking at the impact of things, then you look at how do you properly offset, because you always have an impact. And I've been viewing it kind of like a figure eight. Like as you reduce your impact or you increase your circularity quotient, you have less that you have to do offset. So you're creating the incentive to innovate so that you have less that you have to offset. Now that's complex, and that goes back to the paradox piece. In order to be able to measure that, you're going to have a shit ton of greenhouse gas emissions because of satellite, because of all the ways that we measure things now. And so that's where
Yeah,
I don't know where we find that sweet spot exactly. But
gotcha.
it is both in the paradox of measuring things better and having the feedback loops that drive
Gotcha.
less
So
impact.
just to be clear, Nina, is that an imperial shit ton or a metric shit ton? Anyway, I love it.
Yeah.
I got it. Bonnie, let me ask you this. We're talking about trees and sequestration, et cetera. I don't think the people understand just how important the ocean is and seagrass. And there's these little, and I forget it begins with a pH, so it's photo something. These little teeny creatures that create more oxygen than all of the rainforests in the world combined. And I don't think people understand that the sea is a huge carbon oxygen machine, right? Can you
Phytoplankton.
speak to
Sure.
that and how we hit that?
Sure, phytoplankton. Yeah, we don't realize that there's also plants in the ocean. It's not just marine life as far as animals go. So you can actually thank the ocean for every other breath you take, because the ocean is also providing oxygen. And there's this incredible loop system that we are learning now because of science, that whales, the great whales, actually contribute to offsetting climate change. You would never make that correlation until
Wow.
you have the scientists understanding that whales are actually farmers of the sea. When they defecate, they're providing nutrients to the surface of the ocean. Those nutrients are quintessential to the phytoplankton. So when we lose the whales, we're actually having a negative impact on the phytoplankton. And that's why, we live in this beautiful planet that is really like an orchestra.
Mm.
Everything has its purpose and everything has its time in order for it to function properly. And as we knock out those building blocks, we actually take several more with them. So, with the destruction of great whales due to plastic ingestion, plastic entanglement, and ship strikes from all of this material that we're shipping all around the world, unfortunately, we are impacting one of the sentient beings that help sustain life on Earth. So I'm going to lead that into why or how Plastic Ocean Project is helping educate people about.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about that. Let's get into that because we're 53 minutes into it and we haven't talked about anything I said we were going to yet.
That's right. Well, it's part of the solution is education. And one of the things that we learned from COVID was people were locked in their homes and they couldn't go to sporting events. They couldn't take their kids to sporting events. They couldn't go to concerts. You were literally locked down and couldn't even watch these things on television, right? So what were people doing? They were watching documentaries. And there was this moment when there was this huge shift. I know because I've seen it through my organization. People watched a lot of Netflix documentaries and started asking some really good questions. And that's that moment when I realized that a documentary about plastics in the North Atlantic would really be important right now, because we never talk about the North Atlantic having a plastic problem.
Right. No, you're right. It's not it. It's in the Pacific and rarely you hear about the Caribbean, but yeah.
Exactly right. So it gives us this false sense of security that this problem is over there and it's those people, right? So I wanted to do this documentary. Well, through the process of getting B-roll for this documentary called If the Ocean Could Talk, A Voice for the North Atlantic, we came across a newborn North Atlantic right whale washed up on a beach. And that newborn belongs to a species that is nearing extinction. So that animal, number 356, is now the main character in our film. So you can learn about what happened to this newborn. We're going to do this investigative journalism looking at what was the cause of death. Was it plastic ingestion? Was it entanglement? Was it ship strike? Was the chemicals that end up in the ocean, end up in the mother's milk, that was the demise of this newborn? And through the art of storytelling, we can get people to not only understand the problems, but what are the solutions? We're not waiting to the end to tell you. With each one of these issues, we're going to lead right into what are solutions. So as you're watching this film, you're learning the problems and the solutions so that at the end, we reveal all of the 7 solutions that we have people, that everyday people can do.
Gotcha.
And so it's ending with a feel good, not we're the worst thing on the planet, but that the fact is there's a lot of people out there like you, Michael, like you, Nina, that are really trying to create the change that needs to happen. And with that, educating the masses, the population, that we are the solution. We cannot wait for some great hero. We cannot wait for the government. We are the ones buying the stuff. We are the ones that need to stop buying it. We are the ones that can clean up after ourselves in order to create the world we want to see. And I'm hoping to finish that documentary, the full length documentary, in June for World Oceans Day. But right now we have a short film called 356. And that is how we found this newborn. That short documentary has now been in 12 film festivals globally. So there's a lot of interest. And the ending is really just the beginning of the full length documentary. So the fact that it's in Tokyo, Rome, New York City, Paris, and Munich, Germany. I mean, these are just some of the places that it's ended up. It really gives me hope that people are curious, they want to know. And yeah, I'm looking to a really bright 2024.
That is really, really awesome. I love it. Let me ask you this. When you go in and you see your bathtub is overflowing, do you turn off the valve or do you start bailing?
Exactly. We've got to shut the hose. We got to shut those faucets off, and then we can start mopping up the floor, right? So
Amen. Right. That's what you're talking about. It's both. You can't just get a big bucket.
clean up the ocean, not the answer. You know, we can do it in moderation, but really we got to stop the flow. And we're it. You know, society is it. And I think we're smart enough. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah, awesome. So, Nina, what about you guys there at Stina? What are you guys doing there? What have you done there? And let's clarify what people should understand about Stina and what who should be involved with it and what can they get out of it.
So we've been really transitioning a lot as a company, and what will be really completing that transition in 2024 is we're building out circularityinaction.com, the 2.0 version. Our intention there is to both connect people, meet them where they are with the various actions to drive circularity, provide the insights that are necessary for people to make better decisions, and then spotlight the value chains that are aligning on circularity so that we're putting more positive on the solutions and the leaders in this space to hopefully stimulate more. It's a complex concept, but also developing the circularity quotient so that we're measuring beyond just recyclability. We've got to lean into the other elements of circularity beyond just recycling. Um, and then we have a lot less sexy stuff because we're really just a lot of data nerds. So we'll be doing more audits. Bail audits are important because it's how we get to the granularity of measuring what we do. But also, more importantly, we've really kind of gone off course as a country, and it's not just the United States, but in Europe and Canada as well, and other parts of the region. We don't have harmonization, standardization as to how we measure things. So we're going to be working with a myriad of organizations from national labs like NREL, the National Institute for Standards and Technologies, to really support the standardization as to how we measure things and to measure beyond just recycling. So that's the
Gotcha.
less sexy but really important foundational stuff that we'll be leaning into. And then
Awesome. I love it. I love it.
for the
Go ahead.
public, just letting people know that we have these tools for circularity. it's not the most sexy thing again, but buy recycle. Like we really have to stimulate demand for recovered materials. So we have free directories that help people connect with different specific
Yeah.
actions.
I mean, it's really hard. There's progress, and I've been, you know, the last 5 years just getting into it more and more and more. And last year, about a year and a little bit ago, I just completely left my career of 35 years and said, "We're doing this. This needs to be done," and jumped in full feet, full all the way. And you know, I talk to people every day. I talk to at least 50 people a day. I just keep dialing the phone, and whether I'm trying to get them to buy recycled plastics or just find out what they're doing. Are they using recycled plastics? Do they have recycled plastics? Are they interested in using agricultural plastics? If I can get it recycled, would you use this? Would you not use it? That type of stuff. Run across people. I mean, Los Angeles, California, for God's sakes, a marine manufacturer of products for marine for sailing and boating, plastic buoys, etc., uses no recycled plastics. Like, how is this possible that you're using none? And there's so many that are just starting to dabble in it and start to bring it into their stuff, which is encouraging that they're at least looking into it. But the difficulty is, I can fall down and get you recycled plastic bottles. This is a piece of cake. I can't get you any film. I can't get you any film, but I can get plastic bottles all day long. I can
There,
get,
there's some
high density polyethylene and low density polyethylene, but not in films. And I can't get you any polypropylene, even though like half your refrigerator is filled with polypropylene.
well, you can
But I
go to
can't get you, you know?
plasticmarkets.org and you can find some of these feedstocks. But I would say also, more importantly, what needs to shift as we get into more transparency, more accountability, is more collaboration, as Bonnie started with one of her
Right.
pillars. And I'm seeing some potential emergence because we've kind of gotten stagnant with different trade associations and nonprofits that are kind of doing business as usual, and we're expecting different results. But I have some hope, and there's an organization called the Circular Great Lakes Initiative, which is, as we move more into this public-private partnership and really aligning value chains to drive circularity. One company alone is not going to get circularity. It's how their whole value chain aligns. And another organization that's piqued my interest is the Reusable Packaging Association, and the convergence of how do they demonstrate their members that are using that are actually implementing reuse models, but also with recycled content. You can do both. And so, how do
Yeah.
we create more cachet for the companies that are doing more to reduce overall? We just don't have the market transparency to reward those companies yet. That's why we built the recycled products directory. So we have a recycle meter on it. We actually ask the companies, where are you getting it? Are you third party certified? So we're trying to do what we can to bring the transparency.
Excellent. And we'll talk about that, because what we're doing here at OPT will be a small drop in the bucket at the start, but hopefully will grow huge as far as data collection for what you're doing there at Stina, because we we measure every step of our process, so we know where it came from, what type of product it was, what type of plastic it is, the color, whether it's OBC or Ocean or Green Circle certified, et cetera, where it's going and what it's going to be made into, including the density of its flow through the system. So you can measure and look at theoretically the carbon footprint of the transportation and logistics portion of it as well as the miles. Because I think, Bonnie, you said this earlier, is regionalizing and localizing that circularity is incredibly important, right? So one of the things we're doing is going into the Caribbean in after the first of the year, and it will be an export business when it starts. But attracting manufacturers to actually use those plastics and those recyclables to create the products that are needed in the islands right there, which creates that circularity, the local value chain, and the jobs to keep that circular economy right there, right? But there's so much plastics there, some of it's got to come out. They couldn't make enough products with this stuff. Some 52,000 tons a year just in St. Thomas. of plastics that's not getting recycled at all. It's like less than 1% that we're going towards. The other one is agricultural plastics, working with a number of people to actually go to those farms and recycle that plastics, working with some universities. I just did an article in Mulch Matters talking about how, the plastics that are used in agriculture, people don't understand this. It's not just the packaging that comes with plastic, it's grown in plastics, and people don't understand that, right? And there's a lot of benefits to using that plastics, but it's so dirty and contaminated by the end of it, it just goes to landfill. So if we can figure out how to clean that and reutilize it, and maybe use some type of biomass or degradable or natural substance to do this plastics, that's what part of the study is as well, is getting the recycling going. And boat plastics and shrink wrap. Some 7.6 billion
all
pounds
the
of shrink
subjects.
wrap.
Actually, there was so much great work done last decade on ag plastic, and a lot of it is slipped backwards. Just reconnected with Lois Leviton. She's retired from Cornell, who did so much to really facilitate recovery of ag plastic over the years.
Yeah, well, we can talk. We can talk offline if you'd like about who we're working with. I can't mention them, but there's several global growers and manufacturers of plastics that are very interested in a pilot starting in the spring. And the same technology that we've developed will take care of the boat plastics as well. And because it's really processing film, it's cleaning and processing the film plastics into a rolled nurdle so it can get back into production is the issue there. But yeah, that's what we're looking forward to in 2024. So hopefully we'll get there, and hopefully we'll be able to all inspire more and more people. Bonnie, do you have a closing thought you'd like to leave us with?
Well, this is a great note to end on. It's been a little bit of a rough year. We've had a lot of pitfalls, but because of people like you that get the word out about Plastic Ocean Project, we are funded from around the globe, and I see next year even being bigger and better, so that we can educate more people on the great work that both of you are doing, as well as Plastic Ocean Project. So thank you, Michael, for having me today.
No, thank you. I mean, you inspired me. I mean, when I was looking to get involved in what I was doing with Ocean Plastic Technologies, I was watching what you were doing at POP, and you were one of the first people to come on that actually said, "Yeah, I'll go on your podcast."
Well, thank
And then
you.
I had to stalk Nina for a year and a half.
Worth the wait, though, wasn't it?
Absolutely worth the wait. I'm so glad that you're on, Nina. What do you want to leave us with here? Your thoughts?
The movement I hope we all find our footing towards is a movement that we call Sustain Life on Earth. And we'll be putting out more of a visual on that. But it's such a simple, in decision analysis, you have to have a fundamental objective. And there's how we get to that is really basic, but it should be the same goal for everyone on this planet. So I want to focus more of our energy towards just simply doing what sustains life on Earth, which is also stop war.
Yeah, amen.
Amen.
Yeah, my whole thing is you can do stuff now. Get educated, reach out, look. You don't, I talk to people like you said. Your husband is in logistics. I've been in logistics 35 years, and I honestly believe that one of the biggest solutions and absolutely necessary cog in the wheel of circularity and solving this, along with the education part and the statistic and the statistical analysis and data and transparency that you all are working on, is logistics. The convenience that we've built through our logistics empires and networks around the world have really facilitated this extract, use, throw away, and that's really, that infrastructure is keeping us from that circularity, right? It's I learned very quickly that freight is the F word of recycled plastics. It just is. It's awful. It kills it.
Yeah, so I guess just super oversimplified. Like tonight's the full moon, and just getting out. I've been doing more night hikes, and we're lucky to live next to some woods, and it's just to really appreciate the little wild spaces that are left, and that I get to have a garden. Like, that's a luxury I get. try to just grow anything you can, get outside more frequently throughout the day. It's those connections that inspire us to, like, you can displace that desire for that thing you want to purchase when you just get outside. And I get that I'm coming from a place of privilege in saying that, but as we do more to just simply be outside, and Bonnie's helped inspire me to do that as she's lived a more outdoor life. So
Awesome. Awesome. I just want to say, waiting for somebody else to electrify your powertrain for your car is not a plan. That's not what's going to get
still
it
take a
done.
bike. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to do something else. You got to do something else. That's not the solution. Somebody else, because there's so many good things. I love announcing and getting people to understand what other good things, but I always dribble it with a little bit. You still need to get involved. Just because Nina's working on it and Bonnie's working on it and Michael's working on it and so on and so forth, doesn't mean you're in the clear.
Yeah, my husband
I'd
said,
love to have your back, but the fact is, I can't have everybody's back, and neither can you. We all have to have each other's back on this,
right.
right?
Yeah, my husband said sometimes he doesn't want to bring up something that's negative in the world because he doesn't want to add more worry. And I'm like, honestly, the more other people are worrying, the less I worry. So
Right.
he's like, yeah, just showing
Amen.
that we care. Like Bonnie's been really bringing the word up empathy. The more that we have, that we can empathize with other species, with other people. And, this, a confession, when we used a tremendous amount of carbon, but we took our kids to the Middle East last summer. What an amazing experience to meet people in Egypt and Jordan and Turkey and really connect with people of completely different lifestyles and cultures is priceless. So,
Awesome. Great stuff. Hey, guys, thank you so much, both of you. We'll catch up again, individually and as a team. And hopefully, as we go forward, we'll be able to collaborate our efforts at points. We're all working towards the same thing, and it seems like we're all just different parts along that wheel of circularity. And maybe we'll hopefully work together on some projects in the near future. But anyways, God bless you both, and keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for being on.
thank you, Michael.
Happy New Year. Thank you again, Michael.
You got it.